There we go. Okay, lovely to see everybody, and really good to see Malcolm. Malcolm, if we look at, Malcolm shares a lot of the values that we have in McKinney HR, values of fairness, integrity, inclusion, and impartiality. That really connects with what we do in McKinney HR. And I first met Malcolm, and I'm going to use the words of the lady who introduced me to him, Malcolm. So just go with
that's
that.
fine by me.
I was had a student that I was tutoring at the time. It's probably about 10, 11 years ago. And she said, you need to meet my next door neighbor, Malcolm. He was a full-time trade union rep, but he's okay. So I thought, okay, right, we need to do that. So Malcolm and I, we've had a number of coffees over the years, and lots of I suppose, similarities, both in what we do. There's a crossover, but we've connected really well with Malcolm and his values and his expertise. And to start us off, Malcolm has a couple of slides just to introduce some thoughts on negotiation. Malcolm.
Yeah, no problem, Dorothy. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I remember when I first met you. I didn't realize that the praise had been so faint in terms of the introduction, but I would characterize myself as actually probably being slightly ahead of the curve in terms of the way that trade union negotiation was going at the time, in that I was very much shifted towards the needs-based negotiation as opposed to positional bargaining. But and that's kind of where I'd like to start off. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share a slide, because I think everybody would really be interested to see and meet the first person who really taught me about negotiation. So I'm just going to get that up. I've got PowerPoint for it here, so I will get that up on screen. And so this is Naomi, and Naomi, by a series of by one particular accident, was the first individual to really show me how a very basic negotiation operates. I've got another picture of her slightly closer in, looking at her baby there. Now, Naomi was one of the gorillas that I used to look after when I was the gorilla keeper at Edinburgh Zoo. And there were 4 of them. Naomi was the youngest, by a long way the smallest, and she was, for me, the easiest one to relate to get to have a relationship with. She was very, very cheeky, I have to say. And one day, I was cleaning out the I was preparing their food. And the way we used to get them into their bedding areas at night was to put their food into the bed area. Then they would come in, they would start eating, or they would start looking through their food. I would close the gate behind them. That was them in for the night. So this evening, I put Naomi's food into her bed area. She came running in. I went through to the keeper's room to get the food for the next gorilla, who was going to be Yinka. And as I was picking up the bucket of food, I heard this rattling noise, crazy rattling. I was thinking, what on earth is going on there? So I went back through, and there was Naomi with a padlock in her hand, and she was rattling this thing up and down the bars, making a big fuss. And I was thinking, oh no, how has she got the padlock? So I looked at the door and actually realized that not only had I forgotten to padlock the door, I'd actually forgotten to draw the bolt across. So if she'd wanted to be, Naomi was actually out and running about with me. So I drew the bolt across, but then I thought, how on earth am I going to get my padlock back? Because I needed to padlock the cage. And I thought, what have I got? Because she's got her pile of food, and what have I got that she doesn't? And I had 2 things. I had some dried dates, and I had some dried figs. Well, Naomi hated dates. She never ate them at all, but she loved figs. So I thought, right, that's my opportunity. So I went and got some figs, put them down on the ground in front of me, and I sat down and started munching these figs in front of her. And of course, she was focusing on me because she knew that I was wanting that padlock. She knew that that was the thing, and so she was ignoring her food. She was just focusing on me, and then so obviously saw me eating figs, put her hand out underneath the door of the cage, and begged. And I'll just do my gorilla impression, which is a kind of impatient, give me something of what you've got kind of noise. So I turned my back on her. After pointing at the padlock, but turned my back on her and started munching figs again. So she reached over to her food and she got the cabbage. And she hated cabbage. She never even ate it. I don't know why we bothered giving it to her. But you know, it was something that she could offer. So she jammed that underneath the door and then put her hand out to beg for the figs again. So I shoved the cabbage back and went, pointing at the padlock. And she looked back at her food, and then she reached over and she got the carrot, and I kept on rejecting things, and she went basically all the way through her pile of food. And we went through, yeah, we've just had the carrots, but we went into things like, you know, tomatoes, we went to apples, oranges, and we're getting into much more prime territory for her there. There's a higher value in those things. I knew I was getting somewhere when she got to the grapes, because she absolutely loved grapes. And she shoved the grapes out, put her hand out to beg, and I shoved them back and went, pointing at the padlock. And she looked at me, and she looked down at the figs, and she looked at the padlock, and she looked at me and looked at the figs, and then slid the padlock out. And I went, there are your figs. So we'd reached a trade, we'd reached an amicable resolution where we both got the thing that we needed out of that negotiation. And I think it's just a neat little illustration of a very, very basic negotiation. But what I thought I would use that to do is just to illustrate, and I'll just share my screen again, the kind of the classic positional bargaining that probably all of you will be familiar with. So what you'll see on your screen now is the model of a positional bargaining, where if you on the ones that are in red, if you open too far apart, then you're insulting the other party, and that can completely derail the negotiations, absolutely derail it. You then have an area which is known as the credible zone, where the offer it's credible, it's something that there's a negotiation to be had, but you're not actually in that position where it looks like you'll be able to settle. That's the bit in the middle, which is the zone of potential agreement, which is the ZOPA in the middle. So just to run through this particular bargain, what we're looking at here is I'm party A, so I opened the negotiation with a small pile of figs. I felt that was a credible offer. I don't know if Naomi did, but I felt it was credible. I felt her offer of half a cabbage was actually a bit of an insult, but I decided to turn a blind eye to it and to push ahead with my second offer, which was a big pile of figs. So I'm offering a big pile of figs. I get back the offer of the bunch of grapes. Okay, so we're now both into the credible zone, and we're kind of thinking, I'm thinking, well, okay, I need to make another move here, and it needs to be a good one. So my move is to a huge pile of figs. And once I've put the huge pile of figs on the table, she comes back with the padlock. So we're into that ZOPA. We've got the potential agreement. We've got it in place. That's a classic model of the positional bargain. Now, I have to say, positional bargaining to me is something that I'm always encouraging people to move away from, because to me the real power from negotiation comes when you get to the needs that are behind what the wants are. People say, I want something. is it what they need? And I can tell stories about that until the cows come home. So we'll maybe come back to that. Oh, Dorothy's frozen, at least on my screen.
Oh, back now.
You're back.
I wonder what happened if you hadn't got anything to bargain with. That would have been an interesting challenge. But we'll not go there.
I think I would just have had to have worked out something to bargain with. Yes.
Yes.
Maybe gone and got some bananas or something.
Yes. When we look at, you see the TV and you look at negotiation, we can easily think that it's all about the money. And I guess we all know that in our own businesses, our own workplaces, we're negotiating all the time. And, Lindsay was saying before we come on the call, she had to get her daughter out the kitchen so that she could get using her laptop, and all of that is negotiation.
Yes.
But this bit about it ain't all about the money. Talk to us a wee bit about that.
Well, I suppose the easiest way to illustrate that is going back to a negotiation that I was facilitating. This would be probably 5-6 years ago, something like that. So basically what had happened was the unions, there were 2 unions involved, one employer, and the unions had put in a claim of 10%. Now, this was in the heady days when inflation was in single figures. In fact, I think it was round about 2.5 or maybe 3% at the time. And I know we dream of those days again, and they will be back. They will be back one day. But at this point, when you've got a 2% inflation rate, a 10% pay increase or a claim looks big. It looks high. And the response from the employer had been 1%. And so, and that looks low. So basically you're looking at openings, very positional, and they've opened each of them in each other's insult zones. So basically they almost immediately got themselves deadlocked because they knew their positions and they didn't know how to move from those positions. So when I started sort of the facilitation part of it, and the facilitation is basically a step to give them a chance to break the deadlock before they're actually into formal dispute, before you're getting probably ACAS involved to resolve the actual dispute. So it gives a second bite to the cherry, basically. So I sat down, first of all, with the union. They're the ones making the claim, so they were the logical ones for me to start with. And I said to them, tell me about this 10%. And they went through why they were claiming 10%. And it was things that you'll all be able to predict that were there. I'd be talking about austerity, the austerity budget that had been in place since 2010. They were talking about prices going up. Well, they didn't realize they were born at that stage with prices going up, but they were still going up, and various other increased costs and things that were going on. Plus they'd had pay freezes for 2.5-3 years as well. So they're sort of going, well, so our members have lost a lot of money here and we're trying to recover some of that. And I said to them, yeah, but that's just money. And nobody needs money. And I said, and they're kind of going, oh, hang on a minute. And I said, yeah, but nobody needs money. What you need is to be able to provide a home, to heat that home, to feed and clothe your family. Those are the things that you need. And the money is a means for you to get those things, but the money isn't what you need. What you need is the ability to provide those things for you and your family. And, they thought about it and they said, well, yeah, okay. But our members have lost out on income over the last few years. They need to have more money so they can continue to provide the things that their families need. So how much does that look like? Round about 5.5%, maybe 6%. So we've paired off 4 to 4.5% from the claim by focusing away from the want to the need. Now, I did the same thing with the company, and I said, why have you offered 1%? And their starting response was, well, because they asked for 10. which is, again, in positional bargaining, very typical parent-child response. You have reactive devaluation, as it's called. Somebody puts in an offer that's in the insult zone. Well, that's it. I'm going to insult you back, is kind of the way you go. So I just started asking them questions about the business, how things were going, and now through the conversation, it became clear that they had a significant problem with staff turnover. Have you looked at why people are leaving? Well, yeah, career opportunities, people are just moving on, and yeah, and actually they're mostly moving to jobs that pay a bit better than we do. Okay, right. So how much would you have to put into the pay bill to close that gap with your competitor companies? Probably about 5%, thereabouts. So by getting the two parties to look at what they needed, not what they wanted, you closed the gap from 10% and 1% down to 5.5% and 5%. And in the end, the offer was actually, the union actually also identified an issue where a lot of their members were carrying a lot of debt. So we discussed about things, and the employer actually found a debt consolidation service that didn't cost them any money and wasn't charged to the individual. So they were able to make an offer that was 4.5% plus this service, which turned out to have an average value of about 1.5% to the membership, in terms of the saving on the cost of servicing the debt. So by looking at the need, they ended up with a very creative solution that solved the problems that each of them have. And this is something I always say: if I understand what you need and you understand what I need, we might each be able to identify ways that that need can be met that the other has never thought of. And that's when the negotiation becomes a really creative process.
Absolutely. What a really, really good example. And you're bringing to mind the thoughts of the challenges with egos in the room.
Yes.
Where it becomes a kind of personal, I have to win,
yes.
rather than we need to come up with a solution that we're all comfortable with.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've seen a lot of that over your time.
Oh, far too often.
Far too often. Yeah.
Far too often. I mean, I've had negotiations where I've had to do them as shuttle negotiations because there are two individuals. One that comes to mind particularly was actually when I was still a negotiations officer with the union. And we were doing a pay and grading review in this particular organization. And there was one of my union colleagues, so there were 3 unions involved, but one of the full-timers for one of the other unions, every time he spoke, the head of HR just bristled and was immediately arguing without having heard a word of what was going to be said. And the same was happening in return. So the two of them clearly just did not like each other one little bit and were just bristling when the other one spoke. So they didn't actually hear a word of what the other was saying. So eventually I identified one of the directors who was on the management side of the table, who everyone from our side of the table related well to. So I took them aside and I said, look, we need to do this as a shuttle. We're to do this in a way that doesn't allow their egos to get in the room and to cause the problem to the negotiation. Otherwise, we're not going to get through this. And that's what we did. From then right to the end of the process, we did it as a shuttle, so that their egos weren't impacting on everybody.
And that's a major issue in workplaces where there's not an independent negotiator there facilitating and supporting that process.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, I remember going in a good few years ago now, we did an investigation where a union rep, of course, was in representing, accompanying one of the individuals who was the grievance was against. And they started to talk a little bit about the role of HR and what had happened. And the union rep speaks up very strongly. We don't trust HR. They let us down at and described another situation.
Yeah.
And that impacted across every blooming conversation that they were
Yeah.
having in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are two things, because I noticed that somebody's put a question in chat
What is
saying,
a
what is a
shuttle?
shuttle?
Yep.
The shuttle in that context was me and the director that we'd identified. So we agreed that we would shuttle between the two negotiating groups. So we ended up with 2 rooms, management in one room, the unions in another, and the 2 of us moved between the 2 rooms. So I mean, it's obviously a metaphor for a shuttle and a loom, but that was how we operated. We moved backwards and forwards, taking the messages and the progress, and we got through it, which was the useful outcome from that.
And I guess putting ourselves back into the workplace side of it, that importance of when you have people sitting in a room without an independent person there, the criticalness of preparation and getting being accurate. And I recall a meeting a long time ago, a manager was trying to persuade a member of staff to do something different, let's say, had their union person with them. I was there from the HR side, and the manager just started off in a very patronizing way and surprised me, because that wasn't that person's natural way of doing things. I think he was nervous, and it came out a bit of like, well, I'm in charge here. I got some of his information wrong, and we just had to stop and say, look, okay, we need to do a wee bit more work here. We'll come back, because there was just not a hope of the rapport, if there was any, was totally gone.
Well, there's the old adage, if you fail to prepare, then prepare to fail.
Yes.
I mean, and it is a bit of a truism. Having said that, sometimes you don't have time to prepare. But the key thing then, it comes back to, when you've already mentioned the word right at the beginning, integrity.
Yes.
And the way to act with integrity, if you've not had time to prepare, is to listen, ask questions, take on board what the other person is saying, and be open and honest about, I've not had time to prepare. Be apologetic if that's appropriate. And not apologetic if it's not appropriate, but just be factually accurate that, okay, I don't have the information I need. If I understand what you're actually asking for or offering here, then I can go away and I can get the information that I need, and I can do that in a more accurate and timely way. But underneath all of that is this need to listen. And listening is such an important skill. Well, I mean, when you and I both do mediation, we both know that it's absolutely vital in mediation. What people don't often realize is just how important it is in a negotiation. So I was actually going to share a quick slide, if that's okay.
Of course, go for it.
Illustrate.
That bit about listening to understand rather than listening to respond.
Yes, absolutely. Right, so I'm just going to share this. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to see an illustration with three dots on it. So if we go through those, these dots are the different levels of listening. And this is one theory. There are other models. Stephen Covey's one that he covers in the 7 Habits of Successful People, or whatever it's called, is a good one. This is an alternative one. But you'll probably recognize these levels as you go through. So the lowest level is waiting for your turn to speak. Actually, the level below that is the one that probably people very commonly use when they've got children in the room or something like that. And they're saying, mum, look at me. Dad, are you going to come and do this, whatever. And you're going, yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, that's wonderful. But you're not actually listening to what they're saying. The level above that probably is waiting for your turn to speak, and you probably recognize this in yourselves. I would do a show of hands, but I think that would be pointless, because I think everyone would put their hand up. that when you've been having an argument, usually, it's not usually part of a discussion, but usually part of an argument, you know what you're going to say next, and you're just waiting until they draw breath so you can get it in. And you're just waiting for your turn to speak. How much of what they're saying are you actually listening to? Almost nothing. So that's a kind of fairly low level, poor way of speaking. The next level up is one, and you will, if you've not done this yourself, you probably will have done at some point, but you will almost certainly know somebody who does this frequently. I could tell you the names of 3 or 4 people I know are terrible at doing this, which is, Dorothy comes to me and says, "Oh, I've got a terrible headache today." And I respond by going, "Oh my, yeah, I had a headache yesterday and I've no idea what caused it. And it just went on and on and on. I just couldn't get rid of it. And I sort of ended up going for a walk and having a drink, whatever." So I've responded with how it's impacted on me, that same thing. Have I listened to Dorothy about her headache, which might have had nothing to do with the headache? She might have been wanting to talk about something else. No, I haven't. So the next level up, and this one, I think most people on this call will recognize as well. Certainly anybody who works in HR will have fallen into the trap, because this is professionally what you're trained to do. Somebody comes in, tells you what their problem is, and you respond by giving them advice on how to solve it. That's fine in a certain professional context, but it's not proper listening. Somebody comes in and sort of says, "Oh, Dorothy," the same one, Dorothy comes in and says, "Oh, I've got this terrible headache." And I'm going, "What? Have you tried taking a painkiller for it?" So maybe if you go out and get some fresh air, that might help. Or is your neck tight? You can maybe stretch off your neck. I've not bothered to find out, is it the headache that Dorothy's really worried about? And actually, she might know exactly what's causing it. And it might be that she's wanting to talk about. But I've not actually listened to it. I've just flung in solutions to that problem. And the one that we're all aiming for is the active listening, which is Dorothy comes in and says, "Oh, I've got this terrible headache." "Really? Tell me about it." And then space. And the space, that silence is really, really important. Actually, I'm just going to stop the share there. I'm going to ask everybody a question now. And what I would like you to do is to put a message in chat once the answer to a question comes to you. The question is this: how long after I've asked this question does it start to feel awkward that nobody's talking? Yeah, absolutely. It's one of these things that people don't like silence. And if you ask a question or make a statement and leave silence, people will want to fill it. Yeah. A few minutes. Wow. That a few minutes is you're doing well if you can leave it a few minutes. Most people, it's that 15, 20 seconds thereabouts before they go, "Oof," and it feels really awkward. It's worth remembering that, because if you really want to listen to somebody, ask them a nice open question, or just, just a statement. The one that I used with Dorothy wasn't even a question. Sort of like, "Oh, you're having a headache? Tell me about it." And then you leave that space and the person will probably fill it.
Absolutely. The person always fills it and always gives you more information.
Yeah.
And that, tell me what happened, those 4 words, tell me a bit more. Are
help me to understand
just
that.
amazing, simple.
Absolutely. I was doing some advanced negotiation skills training with one of the big power companies recently. They're working on improving their relationship with the unions after sort of some fairly serious industrial action, probably about 4 or 5 years ago. So they're trying to rebuild the relationships, but wanting to build the skill sets as well. So we did this section about listening, and we had a break over the weekend, so I encouraged them to go and practice on their family and friends. And on the Monday morning, one of them came in and went, "You've got something to answer for." And I said, what happened? He said, "Well, Friday evening, I went to collect my daughter from her dance class. And I thought, oh, I'll practice my active listening. So I asked her an open question about what she'd been up to. She was still going 2 hours later." But he also said that he realized that it was, in his opinion, the first time in her life that he'd actually listened to her, properly listened, which I thought is, you know, and I suspect that applies to an awful lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. We talked a wee bit when we talked before about body language.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to just, I think you had a really good anecdote about that, and then we'll see if Rona's got any questions for us.
Well, it kind of links actually with the whole thing of listening.
Yes.
It links with the whole thing of listening. And it's something that it's worth remembering, that your body language tells people that you're listening. You know, how do you tell that I'm listening to you? Well, first of all, if I'm kind of way back here like this, I'm probably not listening. If I'm here and I'm paying attention to you, I probably am. And it's one of the things that's a bit strange about being online, is because the eye contact is a bit different. I mean, if I look at Dorothy, I'm looking there. But actually, to look like I'm actually looking at her, I need to look at the camera and talk there, which probably feels more like I'm actually listening to you.
Yeah.
But the story that I think you're referring to is one of my colleagues that I work with, who used to be the head of hostage and crisis negotiation with the Metropolitan Police. And he was telling me about this hostage situation they had, where somebody had done a raid on a bank, and they'd ended up taking hostages in the bank, surrounded by police, and the police were negotiating. They got the hostage taker on the telephone, and they were chatting away. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, the hostage taker just shouted, "You're not listening to me," and hung up. And they were so used to getting people talking and building a relationship, a rapport. They kind of thought, what went wrong? What went wrong there? So they analyzed it. And it turned out that the thing they could actually identify was that the person who was on the telephone speaking to the hostage taker was leaning back in their chair, and they had their feet up on the stool beside them. So they were leaning back, like talking away like this. And somehow that had come over in their voice. And this is the thing that we need to remember, is that people are so perceptive that they will pick up the subtle things that we are not going to be aware of. You will probably pick it up if somebody's, sort of like somebody's actually checking their email on something like this. You'll actually probably know from the sound of their voice. You'll also pick it up from the way they're paying attention. It's partly why, if I'm going to, that's where I've got my PowerPoint, that's where I've got the display that's got everybody on it. So if I'm looking across the group, I'm looking over here. If I'm looking at my PowerPoint, it's over there. I quite often talk my way through that, because it means that people know that it's there. But the thing that came from all of that with me, with my colleague Phil, he said he was very frequently asked, how on earth did you talk them out of that situation? And he always says, we didn't talk them out, we listened them out. And that's in a hostage and crisis situation. You listen, you listen, you listen. And you hear, what are the underlying needs for that person? Why have they taken these hostages? What's driven them to commit that crime? And then you can start to work with them to understand what it is that they actually need in order for them to climb down from the situation they've got themselves into.
Really, really good example. Rona, have we any questions coming through before I ask Malcolm any more?
We don't at this stage.
No? Oh, that's
So I've
I've
reminded
plenty more.
everyone just to use the chat if they have. So at any point you can put a question in. So we'll just continue, Dorothy.
Okay, excellent. Okay. One of the things that I suppose there's a lot of crossovers between with in mediation negotiation in terms of those personal skills that you
Yes.
use, the active listening.
Yeah.
The one that pops to mind is the realistic expectations
Yes.
and reality checking. And
Yes.
if it connects to some of what you've said earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to an extent, if you're talking about in the context of negotiation, then some of that comes down to the preparation. And actually, quite often the reason people end up in a situation where they need the mediation is because they don't really know what they need out of a situation. Quite often they've not thought about it enough to really understand what it is about their interactions with the other party that is actually problematic. So quite often you need to do a lot of work with those parties to get them to identify what their needs are in the situation. And I find the same whenever I'm coaching people through a negotiation. The first step is working really hard with people in order for them to actually understand what they need out of that negotiation. You know, well, we want to reduce the headcount in the organization by 50. I had that from an organization that I was working with. You know, we've got a budget gap, and we're underfunded by about £1.5 million a year. We need to shed 50 staff. Okay, fine. Now they took guidance from me to undertake a consultation with their staff. Because there's another thing here about in terms of the knowledge about an organization that resides within the staff. I mean, there's some research that's been done that's shown that senior management team might only know 4% of the problems that the organization faces. So the other 96% of problems are known to other people in the structure. In this particular case, because I persuaded the company to do a really early consultation, so before they'd started any redundancy processes or anything, they put out to their staff, this is the position we're in. We have this problem in terms of our funding. Now, because they did that, their staff got together and identified various ways that they could make more money in other ways. And as a result of that, they ended up with about 4 or 5 new income streams. They ended up with several other strands becoming much more effective, much more efficient. And in the end, they only had to make 5 people redundant, all of whom went on a voluntary package. So instead of them going, well, we need to get rid of 50 people, actually, they only needed to get rid of 5. You know,
cannot underestimate the value of communication. And
absolutely.
I'm seeing quite a few questions coming in.
Yes.
Rona, do you want to fire them at Malcolm?
Yep. So we'll start with Lindsay from our team. She's actually asking Malcolm, how did you get into negotiation from zookeeping?
I was inspired by Naomi. Well, I'd actually studied zoology and wanted to work actually in nature conservation in Scotland. So that's where I went. After a year working at the zoo, I switched and worked for what was then the Nature Conservancy Council for Scotland. It's now Nature Scot. But when I was working there, most of the time, it was Scottish Natural Heritage. And as I always say to people, the thing about working in nature conservation is all you're doing is trying to persuade people to do things differently. So the whole thing of nature conservation is all about negotiation. So basically, when we went through the process of redundancies, which I negotiated the redundancies, negotiated relocation packages for people who weren't being made redundant, etc. So there was a whole load of stuff that I negotiated there. The union offered me a job as a full-time negotiator on the back of having done that. And for me, it wasn't a huge leap because I was simply applying the same skills in a slightly different way. So it's all about transferable skills. And I suspect there's an awful lot of people around who, if they looked at what their needs are and then looked at their transferable skills, they could probably meet their needs by actually using their transferable skills in a more effective way.
That's really interesting, Malcolm, actually. You don't think that that would be a link, but that's a very clear one.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was fairly natural. I did think I was only going to do it for a couple of years and then go back into nature conservation, but 12 years later, I decided to leave the union and start my own business. So
There you go.
yeah.
Okay, so we've got another one from Lindsay, different Lindsay. What are the differences between informal and formal negotiation?
Oh, I'm so tempted to just say the formality. I mean, the thing is, where's the boundary between the two of them? And I would say, if you're going to have a formal negotiation, it's very, very advisable to have some informal discussion with the people that you're going to be negotiating with beforehand. Because from my perspective, you can never consult too early. So therefore, having an early conversation, sort of, even if it's just sort of like, okay, so what sorts of things are we actually going to be negotiating about this year? What issues are there, so I can go and get ready to negotiate with you? That level of preparation. The formal bit probably comes when it's got a level of scrutiny from an outside body. So, you know, for example, a public sector body will have the eyes of the government sitting on it when it's undertaking core negotiations. I think we've seen so much political interference in all the negotiations that are going through industrial relations problems at the moment. Actually, a lot of those industrial relations problems are because of the political interference that's been going on. But that's the scrutiny that comes under, because those are formal negotiations. There is a massive amount of negotiation that will be going on in and around that formal negotiation that's happening informally. I will be absolutely astounded if Mick Lynch isn't on the phone every other day to the leader of the rail company's representative body. You know, they'll be having a lot of informal conversation about what the possibilities are. Can you look at this? Can you look at that? How about if we do this? I mean, again, the difficulty there being that the political interference has undermined the authority of the rail companies in that context, but that kind of gets into a different thing. So to me, that's really the formality, is the formal bit is the bit that's in front of people. So for the union, it's in front of their membership. You know, everything will end up in front of them. So.
Yes, and just to add to that, in terms of my HR world, the formal would be the negotiations that happen under joint consultative committee rules. So whether that's, and it may well be about, it might be about pay, it might be about policies, it could be a whole range of things. But the informal stuff is sitting down in a wee office somewhere saying, look, we want to change this sickness absence policy, and this is what we need to achieve. Back to, we've got a lot of people going off, you know, short frequent absences, blah blah. How can we together change this? So that's where I would think about that. Other questions there, Rona, I think?
Yeah, so we may have started to answer this one. So Kira's asking about when negotiating, and I'm assuming this would be more on a one-to-one type negotiation. If the person's showing no interest, what's the best professional way to deal with that situation?
No interest in the subject that's being negotiated about. I would say that the best thing to do there is to ask questions and listen, because it's really getting to the position underlying it. Is either there's something else that's going on that's distracting them, that means that actually this thing isn't as important to them. So for example, if you're coming in and you're trying to sort of say, well, look, we need to tie down what this change to your annual leave arrangements is. And they're sort of going, yeah, fine, okay, whatever. Now, in that kind of situation, okay, what's going on? There's something happening behind there. So what is it? What's actually in the way? And it could be something in their private life. It could be something health-wise. It could be something to do with an interaction with colleagues. There's all sorts of things that could be playing in there. You know, for example, if one of your children is ill and in hospital, and somebody's coming in and is trying to sort of say, well, look, we need to tie down this change in your annual leave arrangements. Are you really going to care? Not really, because you're going to be thinking about the child that's in the hospital. So it's all about where they are in the priorities. And actually, if you can understand that there is this other thing that is going to trump it, then you might actually be able to have a conversation with them that allows them to realize, actually, we need to get this sorted out now. And then that means that you can focus on the things you really need to focus on. But you really need to have that conversation and listen more focusedly, I think.
I think it's all linking in, isn't it? The listening, the rapport building, understanding their needs. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We've got another one, different scenario, but I'm sure lots of people wonder about this one, is when you reach a deadlock. So how do you negotiate? And they've added, if you know you're not being listened to, but the other person is actually after a win, how can you close that up so that there's a mutual feeling at the end?
Yep. Okay, one of my probably overused phrases is, do you want it right or do you want it right now? Because sometimes you need to take your time to get to the right place. Usually, if you've reached a deadlock, it's probably because there is some information that's critical that hasn't been shared, or there's a fundamental disagreement about something. So again, you look at some of the ongoing disputes, there is information that is not being shared. Particularly in Westminster, we've got a government that thinks that bargaining, that negotiation is positional bargaining. They don't understand the whole concept of needs-based. So under that approach, information is power. So there's information that they don't share. Now, if you don't share information, you can't build trust. And if you can't have trust, then you're going to reach a deadlock. Because actually, it doesn't matter what you say to me. If I don't trust you, then even if you've said it to me, I'm not sure I can believe it. And I can't trust that you'll follow through and deliver on it. So therefore, I might as well maintain the position that I've got. So it may be that if you reached a deadlock, the thing to do is to take a time out. The other thing is to think about, there's this triangular approach that you can take, where all negotiations are about to do with people, a process, or a problem. So there's a problem that you need to solve, there are people involved in it, and there's a process that you need to go through in order to get there. So if you've reached a deadlock, then it will be because of one of those things, possibly all three of them, or a combination of two of them. So if you think through the problem from the point of view of, okay, why are we reaching deadlock? What's happening with the people here? All right, okay, well, Dorothy and I had a bit of an argument. We got quite angry with each other and we're not actually able to listen to each other properly. Okay, there's a reason why we've reached a deadlock, because we're not actually listening to each other anymore. So we need to solve the underlying issue that caused that anger. Once we've got that, we can probably focus on the process to move towards solving the problem. Maybe the problem isn't being properly defined. Maybe we've got a different understanding of the problem. Like I'm the employer that thinks I need to make 50 people redundant, whereas you're the workforce that actually knows that there are lots of ways that the company could make more money if only management would listen to them. So if I keep saying, well, we need to make these 50 redundancies, no, you're not going to do those 50 redundancies. That's a deadlock, but it's a deadlock because we've not properly defined the problem. And the same with the process. Are we negotiating in the right way? Do we have the right people in the room? You know, me and Dorothy are doing the negotiation, but actually, Dorothy, do you have the authority to settle here? And that's a big feature that we're seeing in a lot of the disputes that are on the go at the moment. I think the classic one being the RMT one with the rail companies across the UK, where we saw in, I think it was last August now, they were almost at the point of settling when there was a public announcement from Grant Shapps about how greedy the trade union was being. And all of a sudden, you've got Mick Lynch sort of going, hang on a minute, who am I negotiating with here? Who's got the authority? Is it the government or is it the rail companies? And actually, the rail companies were asking the same question. They're going, hang on a minute, do we have, I thought we had the authority here, but we don't know if we do anymore. So you know, there's that kind of thing that can lead to deadlock as well, because you've lost the clarity on the process and that key process element. I've gone on a wee bit there. I'm sorry about
it's
that.
really, really
Hopefully
good
it was all
stuff,
useful.
Phil. Is there one last question, maybe, Rona?
There is, yes. Are negotiations legally binding once agreed, and can people back out after?
As one of my former colleagues always used to say, I'm a professional negotiator. The answer is, it depends. And it very much does depend, because some are and some aren't. I mean, generally, it depends. You know, if you're negotiating towards a settlement with an individual, for example, the settlement, once you've signed it, is legally binding, because it's going to be a proper settlement agreement under the Employment Rights Act. Most settlements that are reached under collective bargains, once they've been ratified by the negotiating body, will become legally binding at that point. If it's a negotiation over a shift rota, or over, you know, well, leave arrangements I've already mentioned, or you know, local holidays, or you know, anything like that, those are unlikely to be legally binding in themselves. But you need to be careful, because they might become an implied term of the employment contract, which kind of doesn't make them legally binding, but it makes them something you might be legally liable for. So yeah, it depends.
Really good question and really, really helpful answer, Malcolm.
Thanks.
Last question from me. What's your top, I think we know what some of these are going to be. What's your top 5 must-dos?
Well, I do them in reverse order. Why don't I?
Yes.
There's probably a bingo card out there with at least one of them on it.
There is, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we all know what it is.
So you can all shout bingo when I finally say it.
Yes.
I would say the first thing is don't underestimate the impact of your body language and what you're saying without saying anything. There's research which has been, some people say it's been discredited. I don't think it is. The Mahabrian work on the communication it's about communication of something about which somebody is emotional, and that's why it's been discredited, because people use it to illustrate other things. But what Mahabrian found was that if people are communicating about something about which they're feeling emotional, only 7% of what they're communicating is coming in the words that they're saying. And you know, it's a little, it's not quite 50-50 of the rest of it, but some of it is in the tone or the non-verbal things, and the rest of it is in body language. You know, so you know, remember the impact of your body language in what you're saying and how it will be perceived by the person you're saying it to, and that can come over on the telephone as well. The next one is prepare, because you can't really be over prepared. But focus your preparation on anticipating what they're going to be needing, and think about what you need. Those are probably the 2 key areas that I would say in terms of preparation. And then share openly as much as you can from that. Acting with integrity is my next one. This is my number 3, because unless you're negotiating a settlement agreement with somebody who's leaving the organization, you're going to have to work with them again. So, you know, particularly if you're looking at, you know, it's all of these collective labor disputes that are going on at the moment, that's something that I think an awful lot of people around those bargaining tables have forgotten, is that once they finish this dispute, it's actually going to be time for the next negotiation to start. And it's the same people who are going to be sitting around having that negotiation. So unless you act with integrity, you're going to undermine the trust that's essential for making that negotiation work. My second last one I would say is consult early. I think it's almost impossible to consult too early. There's a theory around workplace negotiations and decision making, which says that if you consult late, you will end up boxing. If you consult early, you can dance. And they're both interactions between two people, but would you rather be boxing or dancing? And I know the dancing is much less painful. So, and the final one, there's no prizes for guessing what I'm going to say. Listen.
Listening. Yeah.
Listen. And any time you hit a blockage in the process, you think there must be something I've not heard yet. So you can go back and analyze it and come back with that. So that's my top 5.
That's fantastic, Malcolm. That's been absolutely brilliant, and some fantastic strategies there, and helping understand putting those into our own contexts. So that's been really, really good. Thank you. Rona, have you any last words from the chat box?
No, we've had a couple people even saying thanks. It's been really helpful and engaging. So yeah, great session, Malcolm.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So thank you, everybody. We look forward to the next session. Our next session is, somebody help me with the exact wording of that. Rona or Joanna or Angela?
Boss.
Yeah.
Boss.
We did a session previously on transforming conversations, and a lot of people asked us about, well, how do you deal with your boss if their boss is that challenging person, or you're a manager dealing with someone. So that's our next session. We'll be in touch. Thank you, Malcolm. That was brilliant.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, just leaving just now.
And stop recording now.